Hello everyone, welcome to the Travel Coach, moving body, mind and spirit. My guest today is a certified executive coach, family business advisor, and intergenerational resolving conflict expert. She currently works with the difficult conversations and emotions at home, in business, and in family-owned businesses, helping her clients eliminate self-doubt and inner conflict, as well as navigate external conflict with other people. Leah Zimmerman, welcome to the Travel Coach.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm so excited to chat with you today. And you know, Leah, before starting, I always like to ask my guests about the relationship with travel growing up. So can you share with us, what are the memories of this phase of your life?
My family would travel from New York to Florida for vacation, and my mom would usually get something to keep us busy on the airplane, and it just felt so special. Such a great activity. And then you get off the plane and it wasn't cold anymore. So that was pretty fun. It was usually to visit grandparents and Disney World. And then I went on my own. But then my first time traveling outside the country was when I was 12, and I flew to visit my aunt who was living in Israel at the time by myself. And that was definitely a huge changing experience, both because it was great to be in Israel and to hang out with kids my age who lived a whole different way. And I also, quite memorable because we went through London. At the time there was a air traffic control strike, and I was 12 and on my own, and it was a little confusing, delay after delay after delay. So that's kind of memorable for me.
Absolutely. That's something that you will always remember, right?
Yeah. People getting off the plane, and then people saying they wouldn't get off the plane. And I'm like, I just want to fly home.
It's so sweet. So sweet. Leah, yeah. I know that you are an expert in making hard conversations easy.
Yeah.
And part of this expertise comes from your experience living as Jew in the Middle East. So I love to go deeper in this travel experience today. Would you mind to tell us about, first of all, how all this adventure began?
Well, I come from a Jewish background, and my husband's Jewish. We met in Jewish camp. My husband, being the pre-knowledge person that he was in college, and when he traveled to Spain during his junior year, I traveled some of that with him, and he got really interested in the Moorish influences, took a Near Eastern literature class, and from there got interested in studying Arabic. And his studies then in Arabic and Arabic literature took us to places in the Middle East. And here I was working in Jewish education, teaching kids for bar and bat mitzvah, taught Hebrew school, which were paid for my theatrical habits. And he was coming home with all of these studies and things that were completely contradictory to things that I had learned, how I had learned history. So the first time we went abroad, we went to Egypt and lived in Cairo. And I remember really struggling with the conflicting information and wanting to ask other people what they knew and how they thought about things. And it was really different to be somewhere and see things through the other side, see things from the other lens. A particular memory that stands out was we went to this folk dance concert, and at the end, there were a lot of the Egyptian dancers dressed in Palestinian colors, wanting to show solidarity with Palestinians and what the Palestinians had been through. And it was so striking to me how similar it was to the kinds of things I had done in blue and white to show solidarity with Israel in my Jewish settings. And that really made an impression on me. Like, oh, there's another story, or there's other people doing the same thing from another perspective. It was really, experiences like that you can't think yourself into. It's being there and seeing human beings experience the world in such different ways. That's what's transformative.
Yeah, you have to be there.
Yeah.
So going back to that moment, right? So your current
Yeah.
husband was studying or doing some, was excited about knowing more about all this culture,
Yeah.
and arrives home one day and tells you, Leah, we are going to move to Cairo. Was like this? Or what did
It
you
was
think?
kind
What
of
were your
like, no,
thoughts?
it's more like along the way while he's studying the Arabic and he's doing graduate school. He also did a summer program in Middlebury that was immersive. And he says, well, everyone who was there this summer did this program called CASA in Egypt that's run through, I think it was through Johns Hopkins, and it's at the American University in Cairo. And I think this is a program I need to do. And then it would be, I'm applying for it. And then it would be, I got in. And then the details. So I knew it was coming. It was never like, oh, one day we're just going. It was kind of something that starts to be, you realize that anyone who has studied Arabic and feels that are credible to others has done this program. So that's kind of how it was. And then it was figuring out the logistics of when he would go and I would go. He went ahead, he found a place to live, and I finished a couple things, and then I joined him. And then,
so you were
I didn't,
slowing, being prepared, and
yeah,
getting
so
the
we had
idea.
time, because it was a whole move. We were at the time he was in graduate school, so we were finishing graduate school, moving everything back to New York, and then getting ready to go away for the year.
Can you remember at that time, what were the thoughts or fears or challenges, if you had some before moving, if any? I don't know if you had any
You know, I
challenge you had to
don't,
overcome.
I remember when I got there, the challenges I had to overcome. I don't remember the anticipation. I think I like traveling and I like being somewhere different, but you couldn't really know that much. I remember watching videos, and it sounds silly to say, but just seeing it look like a normal city was like, oh, well, of course, what's it going to look like? But you forget how westernized a lot of the cities around the world are, and you're looking for it to look like some kind of distinct ethnic culture. And it really was a city, and this was in the 1990s. And, just that is one of the things I remember watching videos, try to get a sense of it. What does it look like? What's it like there? And buying the books. I mean, now it's different. You can just go online and find so many things. That's what I remember about it. And then when I got there, I remember after a couple of days being completely overwhelmed because I couldn't do anything by myself. Not knowing the language, I remember crying in my husband's lap and just saying, I can't even go buy water at the store. There's a corner store. So he taught me how to ask for water. And water is mai in Arabic, which is like mayim in Hebrew. So that was an easy one for me to remember because it was a cognate. And I remember him saying Aiza in Egyptian would be I want. And so he's telling me eyes, like your eyes are going to see the water. One new way to practice a word, something just to, it's going to be hard now, but just do a little bit and it's going to start to flow. I took a class to be able to know how to read Egyptian in English. So Egyptian language has a written language, and it's like high level Fusha, it's called. And then there's different colloquial in different countries. And I was trying to learn how to speak the colloquial. And I remember that. And as I did that, made me feel more empowered. I also was willing to just sound silly. When you have no choice and your only way to communicate with somebody is to babble like a baby through their language, then you find a way. And the people were so generous there. They were so willing to listen to me go through it and just help me through with a little bit. That's a lot what the early days were like there. Yeah. Yeah,
So
tricky at the beginning for sure.
Especially when the language, as you said, is so difficult or so different, yeah, that the one you come
having
from.
Hebrew was definitely helpful for me, that I'm fluent in Hebrew, or I was at one time, because there's a lot of cognates and the structure of the grammar and the languages is similar. It was interesting though, because I would say to my Arabic teacher that it was, oh, it's very similar. Some of these words are similar. No, it's not. Like,
No.
oh yeah, no, it's not. Because the politics, they don't want to think their language is the same.
But you are so right. When you have no choice and you just are there in the destination, and it's like survival, right? You have to, you will make you understand yourself to the other person. And if the other person is also willing to understand, then it makes everything easier.
Yeah. And you know, something just came to me is we bought this little doorstop, and it's the kind of things you don't know. And it just felt like this way we would know if somebody, I don't remember, it had some kind of alarm, but if somebody was coming in a door that you didn't. And I just remember the woman who I became friends with who cleaned my apartment, so friends but with a class difference, looking at me like I was crazy. But when you're in a place you don't know, the foreign sounds you're very on guard. You're very alert for all the things that sound different until you acclimate to that's what's around you, and then you start to feel safer. But all these new little everything is something you notice. Everything is a little bit different, and you're taking it all in at the same time. So there's a little bit of a very aroused nervous system.
You're in an unfamiliar place.
Unfamiliar. Yeah. An entirely different culture. Sure, yeah.
Totally.
Things operate in such different ways there. Yeah.
So you were you had to overcome before you were not so aware of this difference, but when you arrived there, you came with the challenge of the language, the culture, also differences, other points of view. So you were there like 3 months, you said?
So I was there for 3 months. The other challenge that just came to mind when you were talking was being a Western woman and the assumptions of the men, like if I wore shorts or if I even just walked around in a skirt or just Western dress. They dress fairly Western, but you stand out as a white, European, Western-looking person. And they had a lot of ideas of what that means. They felt freer to ogle and to say things or to reach out and touch your arm. And that was really uncomfortable, and getting used to that was a lot of those first 3 months, but also something that really distinguishes it from when I came back for a second 3 months, because I went back in between to New York because I had things I wanted to do in New York during that year. It was really hard to be separated, but I was so driven to do the theater I wanted to do. And when I went back, I think they knew my husband, so they respected him differently, the people on the street. But I think also I acted like I belonged there. And so I no longer looked like a tourist. And
how did you manage to do that? How does it look like to act like a local?
You're not looking around so much. You kind of know where you're going. Crossing the street there is very tricky because there's no time that the cars stop where you just walk across. You have to just kind of gauge, and it's a dance that you do with the cars, and kind of an eye contact you have to have with the drivers. So as you get to crossing the road and you get a little bit more comfortable with that, I would just tail people at first. That shows that you kind of know what you're doing, that you belong there. I think that's one of the giveaways. Was when I used to not be like, okay, now I have to cross the street, and the cars aren't stopping, and I don't know how to see if I get across the street because there's no crosswalk, and the cars just keep going. And in Cairo, the lanes were just suggestions, and everyone's beeping all the time, so it just kind of looked like, bumper cars sometimes, and you're like, I have to cross.
You managed it very well. So after these 3 months. Is then when you moved to Middle East? What happened after?
Well, my husband stayed there the full year. And after the first 3 months, I went back to New York, which was a change because we'd been living in Texas where he did his master's. But New York is where we were from, and I stayed with my sister. And I was doing acting and things in the city. That's what I really wanted to be doing. And I couldn't really be doing that in Cairo. And then, so I came back so I was there from June to September. We also did a lot of travel. We were in Cairo for some of that time, but we also flew to Istanbul during his summer break and then bussed through Turkey and Syria, Jordan, back to Egypt. We took about a 5-week trip. And then I was back in New York for about 6 months. He came for one of those months during a break, and then I was back there for another 3 months. And during those 3 months, it was very different because now I had some language, I had some experience there. My husband was much more familiar, and people knew him. That's when I started to connect with different schools. So I started to teach. I taught at a dance studio, some just contemporary dance, modern jazz, like people who just wanted to go to the disco and dance. And I substitute taught at the American school and built a community there. I also did some English teaching to people. So I have a strength in being able to build relationships and talk to people, and I just did that through the American expat community. And so we had friends, and I had a life, and I enjoyed the substitute teaching. I also did some dance teaching there for one of the dance studios. I did some work with the drama club. It was very interesting. I did some long-term sub for teachers who had extended leaves. I did first grade, I did fifth grade. So I got also a really interesting view of, it's a very, the Egyptian society is very distinct in its classes and very aware of its class distinctions. And when you come in as a foreigner from a Western, you're with the high class very quickly. And the American school was that kind of, was in this very expensive neighborhood. I took the subway there and then a taxi. Really different than the people who lived on my street. So it was really interesting to really be a part of these different communities.
Yeah, that's interesting that you arrived there, and because of the status, they already see you as somebody, right? And
yeah, well, just having a dollar, just having some money to spend, the American dollar at the time, yeah, you're already living at a style that is really above where most of the country lives. It's a very poor country. I had never seen poverty like that before. I had never seen, we visited a family in the Delta, and that lived basically in, it was like cinder block. It's just the outline of the house, not something that would feel like walls to me. But it was, it was their house. They were very proud of it, and they were near land. And we came, and treated us like royalty. They killed one of their animals. They served an amazing meal. I was terrible though, because I took photos, and at that point, you still had to get them developed. It wasn't like your phone; you could just show them right away. And I guess my allergies slowed me down. I just couldn't. I was doing a lot of teaching. I just could never get myself out to get them developed, and I felt so guilty. That's all they wanted, was to see the photos, and I just could never quite make it happen. There's Hamsins in Egypt, and I had more allergies and stuff with the dust in the air at that time. And I don't know what else. I just remember feeling that kind of guiltiness. But the house they lived in, that for them, being maybe middle class, was still so sparse and so basic compared to anything I'd ever been in.
And they gave you everything, right?
And they
gave you everything.
They were so hospitable. Yes, and they walked us around the town. They were so proud to have us. The hospitality was so warm. They were so giving. Yeah, I was awful. I think I was just too young and too stuck in whatever I was trying to do that, and managed to get past myself and just get those photos developed for them. Yeah. It was like, I just should have given it to him and just let him take it. Yeah.
Looking backwards, maybe you do the things different with experience and with the time. And
yeah, the very few regrets that I have in my life are the things that I did not do there for the people who all they wanted was some kind of self-respect, like that, like the photos. And the other was this friend that I made that I think I told you about, who cleaned in the apartment, I think I mentioned, and she was we would speak between her English and my Arabic. We would sit over tea and we would connect, and she was so excited to show me to this place where she bought an apartment, and buying the apartment was actually buying the right to rent the apartment. It was going to take years till she could even pay off what she needed to be able to start moving into the apartment. I think she expected it to be 10 years still that she had to pay for it. And she was so excited. And it was in Giza far. But the buses in Cairo, I did not like getting on the bus and then I wasn't used to them. I always took taxis because men might be you're close up. They weren't always be polite because, again, I looked like I was an outsider they felt different permission. But we got there, I don't remember how, and I just wanted to take a taxi back. And it was her thing. She was paying for it. She was taking me. And I was just like, no, it's just going to taxi. I'll pay for it. But it took something away from her when I did that. And that's something I go, oh man, I could have just stuck with the headache for an hour. Couldn't I have just stuck with the headache and the crowd and the heat and the humidity and the dirt just for an hour? Because it would have meant so much to her. But
I understand.
Yeah, those are the things I remember.
Did you feel, Leah, at some point the relationship was different because of the different religions? Or did you have any conflict about that?
I was Masihi, which means Christian. And after a while, I couldn't sleep at night. We didn't go around announcing that we were Jewish, but it was a really discreet thing to think about how you're going to tell or who you're going to tell. The expat community knew because it didn't make a difference, and there were other Jews in that community. But I couldn't sleep. Like, this assumption that I was somebody other than who I was just kept me up at night. I couldn't pretend. So I told her that I was Jewish, and her face just fell. And I don't remember how that conversation ended, but we didn't drink tea for a while. She just kind of would look away. She'd invite me over. I think she might have still cleaned the apartment. And then a few weeks later, she invited me in for tea. And she said, well, it can't be that all Jews are bad. That's what she said. And she needed the space and she had to figure it out. But it contradicted everything she thought she knew about who Jews were. When you're in Egypt and Israel's right on the other side and you fight. And when you sympathize with Palestinians, it's one perspective. So
yeah,
that was an interesting thing to watch somebody else respond to me that way and watch her have to go through that. And I guess I never took it personally. I knew enough about the area and why she would think that and respond that way. But I also just couldn't pretend to be something I wasn't, just to have that friendship.
Totally, I understand, totally.
Yeah.
So I suppose is the story that we are told to explain from one point of view, and we have an idea about what the other part, right, the enemy, and then we see the person, and it's just normal human being.
It's not quite
kind.
the same. Yeah, it's not quite the same. And I already knew that by the time I was going to Egypt. I've gotten past some of how I had formulated who Arabs were in my head based on my own upbringing. But it's definitely different when you watch them. And then 5 years later, we went to Beirut for my husband's Fulbright. And I stayed there for the full time, and we had a baby at that time. And that was different too, because in Egypt, they didn't have war on their soil. Well, they did in the Sinai. But the Egyptians had gone into Israel in 48 and in 67, and then Israel had taken the Sinai. But not into Cairo. Like, they never had the Israelis there. But when we were living in Beirut, Israel had bombed the crap out of Beirut for years. There was civil war in Beirut, which was hard enough, all the Lebanese civil war. And then there was the Israeli piece of it during certain years in the early 80s. So their people had direct negative effects related to Israel in a different kind of way than for years ongoing, in a different kind of way. And I'd been on the other side. We have a relative who fought in one of those during some of those years in the Israeli army. So that was where my brain really split open. I think it was the years in between, because it's a process, and being there is when my brain really, and I don't know how to describe the shift, but there's just something that holds multiple narratives and realizes that instead of thinking that it's this or that one is the right hand and one is the left hand, and they're part of the same whole, and they go together, and they're not against each other. They're a part of the same story, and that one story or the other story is the only story that can exist. And it was a really powerful event that happened along similar lines. It was a gym I would go to. Again, you're on the upper echelons of the society, so I would go to. I called it the James Bond gym because it felt so fancy, and made me feel like something out of a James Bond movie. And I was very friendly with Muhammad, who checked me in, and we would chat. And we'd had this conversation at some time during the year where my Zimmerman last name, oh, it comes from the German. Oh, I admire Hitler, he says. My stomach just lurches. I'm like, really? I hadn't heard that before. What do you admire about Hitler? Well, he unified his people. Whoa. Because if you've grown up in a civil war, and that's your formative years, that's like, and you think political science like that, oh, I could see it. I could see how fascism now would be appealing. I said, well, what about like 12 million people died, 6 million Jews? Oh, that's an exaggeration. Like it was unfathomable to him, and it just couldn't be true. He had a few other things he said that challenged. This was not so long after 9/11, and he thought the Jews were responsible. And I just listened. Of course, my tummy didn't feel so good, but I just listened and asked questions. Months later, when I was getting ready to leave Beirut, I pulled him aside that I wanted to talk to him. We sat at a table, and I told him that I was Jewish. And his response was, whoa, I didn't know I could be friends with a Jew. I had 6 uncles who were killed by the Israelis, and one who came home a changed man from the prisons. And it was dramatic for me to see that on him and him take it in. I think we had some contact after that, but eventually lost touch. So I don't know how long, whether he was really able to handle that or not. It was his last day at the gym. I left a few weeks later, or a few days later. I think weeks. I think I had a few more weeks, but I don't think I saw him maybe 1 or 2 more times again is all. But that's where, but I had to be in a place where I first had to just take it all in, but then I have to be willing to accept that he might not accept me. But when he can't accept me, he's not accepting his version of what that means. That what he can see from his perspective, which is shaped by years of civil war and a yearning for a wholeness and destruction, and seeing Israel as agents of destruction, which they were directly. Whatever you think of the war, they did drop bombs and people did die. So, that's just, that is transformative.
Yeah, I can feel already the power of this conversation. Just listening to you, and it's about redefining beliefs, and it's not easy. So we want to believe our part of the story, our version is the right one, and the other is the wrong one. So
that's right.
If we accept the other one, means we are wrong, and there's something there that does not allow us to do this so easy, right?
It's because our identity is often based on our stories. Our stories are related to our sense of identity. And so we don't want to let go of those stories, because to lose those stories is to lose a part of ourselves. And one of the things that I say is that I grew up very Zionist, and there were stories just goes this thing. And I, it was painful to let that go. It was painful to learn other truths that challenged it. I fought at first. I kept reading. For my husband, it wasn't hard. He had never been as attached to those stories and those beliefs. So he was able to make the change. For me, it was a lot harder. I was very attached. They had been a big part of my identity. And to switch and to do it was really hard work. And that's why I feel really empathetic with people who don't do the work, who hold on to their stories and hold on to their ideologies and fight really hard for them, because to let go of it and accept the loss of who you were is really hard. To embrace, to change the level that asks you to change is very hard. And I try to remind myself that now when I'm confronted with ideologies that challenge me, or that, but I just it's hard work. And it's more intuitive for us to fight against it than it is for us to allow those changes. But I'm glad I did. It was hard. But if I said that it wasn't hard, that I didn't mourn in some ways, then I'd definitely be lying. But when you do let that go and you allow yourself to mourn an identity, a new identity can form. And it can be something that you didn't even know could exist, that's richer. But you can't do it. You can't let one go knowing what the other's going to be. You have to do it on faith. So it's not so easy.
What would you say is the key factor? Or, if somebody is in this position, you talk about faith, you talk about let it go, maybe it's compassion, maybe it's empathy. What would you say is the...
Yeah. Empathy. Allow the experience of the other person to be real, even if it challenges everything. Let just there be two possibilities that exist at the same time. Try that. Think of it as different sides of hands. It's true that there are places in Israel where Palestinians were displaced and homes, but the people who moved into those homes were people who survived the Holocaust. There's no right, wrong there. No one should be displaced, but they were all displaced. So it's allowing that human truths can coexist, that there's more than one. But the other is, so there's empathy, but the other is curiosity. Because the wanting to judge, this is something I think that maybe I've always just been more curious, but how could you think that? Where does your thinking come from? How do you form that kind of world concept? It's always been more compelling to me than to decide, name, label, or judge somebody about the way they see things. I think that's the key.
It's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I know we are running out of time. I would just ask you a little last question, because you said that the transformation that you experienced with this trip or this travel experience was not the same. So what was different according to you? Why was the travel, being there, experiencing there, so powerful that you could not learn, for example, on TV or reading books, or, if you never left your home?
So this is the heart of a lot of things in my life. There's a lot that you can conceptualize, but it's not the same as something you experience. So I can tell you about a roller coaster, and I can tell you that it goes up and it goes down and around, but I can't give you the feeling of what it's like to be on that roller coaster. And the exhilaration or the adrenaline, and however that feels for you, whether it's exhilarating or scary, it's going to feel like two different things. Some people are going to like the discomfort in their body. Some people are going to hate the discomfort in their body. But I can't tell you what that's going to feel like. I can describe it to you, but you're only going to really know when you do it. And I think it's the same with traveling. It's the same with being somewhere else. It's immersive. Your senses, your brain doesn't know how to make sense of everything anymore. It has to create new meaning. You couldn't look at the street signs and know exactly what they said. And I'd have to learn the alphabet. And I got a lot of insight around that because I was teaching Hebrew, so it helped me understand what my kids saw when they were looking at the Hebrew letters, because I was looking at something that I had no context for. And it's being in that immersive environment and being with people who treat you or behave a certain way towards you, and what it tastes like and what it smells like. It's like someone can describe a food to you, but the taste of it is something completely different. And that's what traveling is. You can look at the pictures, but it's being there and letting your senses take it in and make sense of it for yourself. That is wordless. And that only you can create that meaning. And I think that's what's at the heart of it, is that you construct your own meaning in the world. And whatever you read is somebody else's meaning. And when you go and you do and you experience, you create your own meaning. And that's the difference. And I look forward to traveling again. Today I traveled and landed in New York from where I live in California now. And it's really coming home. and I'll be here for a little while. And I have children growing up, and we mostly go back and forth to family. But that's what my husband and I are saving up for, that we can go and live and really live somewhere different for a little while again.
That's so beautifully said, Leah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you know that I love collecting hidden gems around the world? So I don't want to let you go unless you share with us from your place, your region, what would you say is like a must to visit?
Okay, I'm in New York, and there are some really good musts. And I was thinking of bagels and pizza, but then I went to a deli. I went to a local deli this morning. I'm on the Lower East Side. And I went to Katz's Deli, and that pastrami was really good. So I think Katz's Deli or the Second Avenue Deli is a nicer dining experience. The pastrami, if you eat meat, that is something very different and special that you don't really find much outside of New York. So that's what's on my mind today.
Good, we take
in
note
my
of that.
hometown.
Thank you, Leah. So how people can
Thank you,
contact you?
Sonia.
If anybody wants to contact you, what's the best way to do so?
Define me through email, steppingstoolcoaching@gmail.com. So kind of like my handle here. I think it might be in my, my daughter set up my Instagram profile. I'm not here that much. And I have, for people who want to think about having difficult conversations or want to be able to move through a process, I have a difficult conversations checklist that I'm happy to share. If there's anyone who wants to email me and just say, heard you on Travel Coach and would love the difficult checklist, make hard conversations easy, I'm happy to just send it off to you.
Oh, thank you for that, Leah.
And Shasang, I can't believe you were in Beirut. Okay, we'll have to talk about that.
Thank you for being on board tonight in the Travel Coach.
Thank you for having me.
So welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you again, Leah, and everybody tuning in. Have safe and happy travels.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.